her landlord changed the locks at 10:52 p.m. While she stood on the second-floor walkway with one plastic bag of clothes and a belly 7 months full. He did it slowly, the way a man does a thing he has decided not to feel. 2 turns of the drill. A new brass cylinder that caught the hallway light. He did not look at her the whole time, and when he finished, he pocketed the old lock and said the rent was 3 weeks late and the owner had a right. She did not scream. She set the plastic bag down against the wall and did not drop it, and she pressed one hand flat against the underside of her belly, the way you would steady something you were carrying across a river. On the walkway below, a woman named Rosetta stood at her own door with the light behind her and watched. And then she went back inside, and the door clicked. And that click was the loudest thing on the whole floor. What the landlord did not know, what none of them knew that night on Judah Street, was that the man they had all agreed was dead had signed something 11 months ago that would make every person in that building learn her name. Her name was Adaize Okoro, and she was 29 years old and 118 pounds, which was 9 pounds less than she should have been at 7 months, because she had been eating 1 real meal a day since March, so the child would not go without. She had a green cardigan she had bought from a church resale on Judah Street for $2, and the cardigan was thin and pilled at the elbows, but it was clean because she washed it by hand every 3rd night in the bathroom sink and hung it over the shower rail, and a woman who has lost almost everything will still guard the one thing that says she has not surrendered. In the plastic bag, wrapped inside a folded towel so it would not knock against anything, was a small wooden box her grandmother had carved in Enugu the year Adaize was born. And inside the box were 3 things: her mother's wedding ring, a photograph, and a folded page she had not looked at in a long time. She had a skill, though no one on Judah Street would have guessed it, to look at the pregnant woman with the plastic bag. Before all of this, she had kept the books for a small import company on the East Side, and she could hold a column of numbers in her head the way other people hold a tune, and she could find in 10 minutes the one figure that a man had spent a year hoping no one would find. She was not trying to prove any of that tonight. She was trying to do the smallest and most human thing there is. She was trying to find somewhere warm to sit down. The management company that owned the building was called Coriston Residential, and the woman who handled Judah Street was named Denise Furlow, and Denise had a laminated tag on a blue lanyard and a way of looking at a person's shoes before their face. When Adaize had gone to the office 9 days earlier to ask for 2 more weeks, Denise had not been cruel exactly. That was the part that sat in the chest like a stone. She had been correct. She had turned her monitor a few degrees and read the policy aloud in a flat voice. The clause about arrears and the clause about notice, and she had said the company could not make exceptions, because exceptions were how buildings fell apart. And every word of it was true, and every word of it was a door closing. She did not raise her voice. She stapled 2 pages together and slid them across the counter and said the locksmith would come Thursday after 10, and she wished Adaize a good afternoon, and she meant it, which was somehow worse. There had been people in that office who saw. A maintenance man leaning in the doorway with a coffee, a young leasing agent at the second desk who looked up once, then looked back down at her screen and did not look up again. That was the thing Adaize would remember longer than the policy, longer than the drill. Not the woman who said no. The young one who had the smallest amount of power in that room, enough to say one kind word, and who chose the safety of her own screen instead. So on Thursday, at 10:52, the lock turned, and Adaize went down the concrete stairs holding the rail with one hand and the plastic bag with the other, and out into the street where the rain had just started. It was the kind of rain that does not announce itself. that is fine as thread for the first minute, and then all at once is running off the ends of your hair and down the back of your neck. Judah Street ran downhill toward the boulevard, and the water ran with it, along the gutters, over the toes of her shoes, and the cold came up through the thin soles and into the bones of her feet, until she could not feel where the sidewalk ended. She walked 4 blocks. Her belly pressed against the wet cardigan, and the child moved. Once, a slow roll under her ribs, as if turning over in its sleep, and she stopped and stood very still on the corner of Judah and Marlowe until it settled, because there was nowhere to sit, and nothing to do but wait for her own body to be calm. She had, until Monday. That was the arithmetic she carried as she walked. The clinic on Delmar would see her Monday for the 7-month check, and if she was not somewhere with an address by then, they would flag the file. And a flagged file was how a woman lost the thing she was trying to protect before it was even born. 4 days. She had $11 and some coins in the front pocket of the cardigan, and she had been counting them without meaning to, the way you press a bruise. At the bottom of Marlowe there was a corner store, with a light still on, and outside it under the awning a woman was folding down the flaps of a cardboard flat of oranges. An older woman in a man's raincoat with a scarf tied under her chin. And when a daisy came into the awning's dryness, the woman looked at her once, all the way, the belly and the bag and the soaked cardigan, and she did not say anything about any of it. She reached into the crate and took out an orange and put it in a daisy's hand and closed her fingers around it, and she said, "Come out of the wet, child," and she moved a plastic stool out from behind the crates and set it down. A daisy sat. The orange was cold and firm in her palm. She did not eat it. She held it against her chest with both hands like it was warm, like it was giving off heat instead of taking it, and she said thank you, and the woman said nothing and went back to folding her flaps. Her name was Miss Ruth, and she had run the corner at Marlowe for 31 years, and she had watched more of Judah Street pass under her awning than anyone alive. She knew which houses had gone quiet. She knew the landlord's drill by the sound of it 2 blocks off. And she knew, though Adeze had said nothing but thank you, exactly whose child was sleeping under that thin green cardigan, because Miss Ruth had known the father, and she had been the one at the graveside 11 months ago who noticed that the coffin they lowered was closed, and had wondered, in the private way an old woman wonders things she will not say aloud, why a man who died in a car would need a closed casket at all. Adeze had married Namdi Osayande in a courthouse 3 years before, on a Wednesday, with 2 witnesses and no rings until his mother sent one. And for a while it had been the ordinary good kind of life, the kind you do not know to be grateful for, until it is described to you later by its absence. He kept the wooden box on the shelf and teased her about the way she counted the grocery money twice. Then his uncle's business, the shipping concern with the office in 3 countries, had begun to founder, and Namdi had been pulled into it to sign things and travel and take calls at 2 in the morning. And he had grown quiet in the way of a man carrying a weight he will not set down in front of you. And then a state trooper had come to the door on a Sunday in the rain and told her that Namdi's car had gone off the Route 9 bridge into the reservoir, and that the current had been strong, and that they were doing everything they could. 2 weeks later they held a service. His uncle Bartholomew handled all of it, the arrangements, the papers, the account that was frozen, and then, somehow, emptied, Bartholomew had put his hand on her shoulder at the graveside and told her Namdi had left debts, that there was nothing, that she should go home to her people, and she had no people left to go to, and she had signed where the lawyer pointed, because grief makes you obedient. That was the folded page in the wooden box. She had signed away her claim to the estate of a dead man who had left nothing, and she had not read it since, because reading it hurt in a place she could not reach. She spent that night on Miss Ruth's stool in the back room among the crates, dry, with a blanket that smelled of oranges and dust. And in the morning Miss Ruth gave her tea in a chipped enamel mug, ginger tea, so hot she had to hold it away from her face, and Daisy drank it slowly on an empty stomach, and felt it go all the way down. Things looked, for 1 hour, as though they might hold. Miss Ruth said she could stay in the back until the baby came. She said it plainly, no ceremony, the way she gave the orange. And Daisy felt the muscles of her back come down from where they had been living up near her ears for 4 days. Then Miss Ruth said, sitting down across the crates with her own mug, that she needed to tell her something she had been carrying, and that Daisy should drink her tea first. And she told her that a man had come to the corner 3 days ago. A man in a gray coat who had stood a long time across the street, looking up at the 2nd floor of the building on Judah, at the window that had been Daisy's window, and who had not crossed. Miss Ruth had watched him from under the awning for the better part of an hour. He was thinner than he had been, and he wore his collar up, and he had a scar now above the left eyebrow that he had not had before. But Miss Ruth had sold that man a bag of oranges every Friday for 2 years before he stopped coming. And an old woman does not forget a face she is fed. What Miss Ruth said next was the sentence that turned the whole night around, and it was only 4 words. And she said them, and then she was quiet and let them sit. She said, "That man is alive." He had not driven off the Route 9 bridge by accident. Nnamdi Osayande had spent 11 months learning what his uncle Bartholomew had done with the company and the accounts and the insurance, learning it slowly and from a distance, from a rented room 2 states away, because the night his car went into the reservoir was the night he understood that a man who had discovered what he had discovered was worth more to certain people dead than alive, and he had made a hard, wrong, human choice, which was to let them believe it, to disappear and gather proof, and to come back only when he had enough to end it, and not before. He had told himself he was protecting her by staying away. He had not known about the child. That was the thing that undid him. Standing across the street in the gray coat looking at a dark window, he had come back with a folder full of proof and a plan measured out to the week. And he had not known until Miss Ruth walked across the street and told him that the woman he had left in the dark to keep her safe had been carrying his child through all of it, alone, and had been put out of her home in the rain 3 nights before he arrived. What Nnamdi did with that knowledge is where the story turns. He did not go to the building. He did not knock on doors or raise his voice or do any of the things a man in a film would do. He went to the office of Coriston Residential on Monday morning at 9 in the gray coat. And behind him came a woman in a dark suit carrying a leather folder. And neither of them was loud. The leasing agent at the 2nd desk stood up when they came in, though no one had told her to, the way a room adjusts itself around a certain kind of quiet. Denise Furlow came out from the back with her lanyard and her flat, correct voice and asked if she could help them, and the woman in the suit set the folder on the counter and opened it and turned it around so Denise could read it. And Denise read the first page and then the second page, and her hand, which had been reaching for the counter, came slowly back to her side. The folder held the deed. The building on Judah Street and 4 others had been placed 11 months ago into a family trust by Nnamdi Osayande before his disappearance. A trust with one named beneficiary in the event of his death. And that beneficiary was his wife. Coriston Residential managed the property. It did not own it. The woman they had put out in the rain at 10:52 on a Thursday night, the pregnant woman with the plastic bag whose shoes Denise had looked at before her face, held the paper that said whose building it was, and had held it, folded, unread, in a wooden box wrapped in a towel, the whole time. Anamdi said very few words in that office. He said, "My wife lived in Unit 22. He said, "You changed the locks on Thursday." And then he said one more thing, quietly, not as a threat, but as a fact a person states, so that everyone in the room hears it the same way. He said, "She was carrying my child in the rain." Denise Furlow's mouth opened and no policy came out of it. Because there is no clause for that, there is no stapled page. And the young leasing agent at the second desk who had looked away 9 days ago was looking now, and had put both her hands flat on her desk. The reckoning was not shouting, and it was not the police. The woman in the suit was a lawyer, and what she filed that week was not personal. Corriston lost the management contract on all 5 properties, and that was ordinary and permitted. But before that, at Namdi's instruction, every tenant on Judah Street who had been put out for arrears in the previous 2 years was found and written to, and the letter offered them their apartments back, and the difference besides, and the first of those letters was hand-delivered to a woman named Rosetta on the 2nd floor, the one who had watched from her lit doorway and gone back inside. The office where Denise Furlow had read the policy aloud became, 6 months later, the intake room for a tenant relief fund with Adese's mother's maiden name on the door, and the first family it housed was a mother and 2 children who had been 3 weeks late on a Thursday. The system that had been correct was made, at the exact address where it had been correct, to be something else. Namdi found Adese in the back room of the corner store at Marlow, among the crates, with the enamel mug still warm in her hands. Miss Ruth had gone out front and pulled the flat of oranges across the doorway as if that would give them privacy, and she had turned her back to the glass. He came in with the rain still on his shoulders and the scar above his eyebrow that his child would one day trace with one finger and ask about. And he did not say a speech. He got down on the floor of the back room, so his face was below hers, so she was not looking up at one more person standing over her. And he put one hand very lightly on the green cardigan over the curve of her belly, and the child moved under his hand, and he made a sound like all the air had been let out of 11 months, and the only word he said was her name. They tried to leave Adese Okoro pregnant and penniless in the rain, and every one of them believed the ledger was closed, that the man whose signature could undo it was at the bottom of a reservoir off Route 9. But grief and paperwork are 2 different kinds of dead, and only one of them stays that way. He had signed the building into her name 11 months before he let the world believe the water took him, and he had done it on an ordinary afternoon without telling her, the way people who love quietly do the largest things, and that single unread page, folded inside a box her grandmother carved the year she was born, sat wrapped in a towel through every cold night, and could not be taken by a drill or a policy or a laminated tag. You can put a person out in the rain. You can change the lock and pocket the old brass and go back inside and let the door click. You can be correct about the arrears and the notice and the clause, and read it in a flat voice, and mean the good afternoon you wish them. But you never know what a person is carrying, or whose name is on the paper folded against their chest, or which of the ones you stepped over on your way inside was the one who owned the ground you were standing on. And the night they turned the lock on her was the last night anyone on Judah Street mistook a quiet woman with a plastic bag for a woman with nothing. She was not walking away from a life that night. She was walking in the cold rain with a child turning slowly under her ribs, straight toward the one that had been waiting for her the whole time. If someone you had grieved and buried and let go of walked back into your life 11 months later and told you they had let you suffer to keep you safe, would you take the hand they held out, or would you make them earn back every night you spent alone in the dark? Sit with it before you answer, because it is not as simple from inside the room as it looks from outside it. Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. And subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks, until the moment everything turns. I'll see you in the next one.